Hello, everyone, and welcome to the sixth webinar of an eight-part series on artificial intelligence, co-sponsored by the G20 Interfaith Forum and the International Academy for Multicultural Cooperation. My name is Audrey Kitagawa, and I will be the moderator for today's discussion. My bio, along with the bios of our four speakers, will be shared in the chat box during their respective presentations. Today's webinar brings together experts to examine AI's challenges and opportunities, and they all share fundamental concerns related to human development and flourishing, including different approaches being designed by cutting edge AI firms to harness statistical demographic information to design programs within organizational structures to maximize flourishing and well being. There is a growing recognition that AI should be evaluated not only by what it can do, but more importantly, by its impact on human flourishing and whether it can measure humanity with care. A 2025 UNDP Human Development Report notes that as AI surges forward, human development has stalled and warns that no path forward is about technology in isolation, but rather how it is deployed, by whom, with whom, for whom, and with what kind of accountability. To flourish means different things to different people because it depends on the context of the personal goals and convictions and is related to individual, social, cultural, and environmental circumstances. Human flourishing encompasses many variables, including health, education, economic opportunity, and security. It also includes broader dimensions such as spirituality, meaning and purpose, agency, and trust. Flourishing enables us to live fruitful and meaningful lives and can help us to realize the fullness and beauty of our own potential. We will take a deeper dive in today's webinar into the distinctions between struggling, striving, and flourishing, and how alignment between actions and experience can bring about and sustain the flow of flourishing. We will also hear about the need of prioritizing wisdom and compassion over raw intelligence, and the role that the alleviation of suffering plays in the intersection between AI, compassion, ethics, and the inculcation of a foundational moral compass. As we continue to explore the presence of AI and the impact it is having on our lives, we are seeing that perhaps this is more about the situation that people are facing than about the actual technology itself, and how technologies can and should be designed at its inception to have a positive place in our lives for the benefit of society and the planet. We are fortunate today to have four panelists who can address the many questions and concerns about AI and human flourishing. First, it is my pleasure to welcome Ali Khan, who is the founder and CEO of Shape Global. Ali, you now have the floor.
Thank you very much, Audrey. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you may be in the world. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for joining us today. I will run you through a few slides, and I will try to take the perspective of a business to think about the impact of a human, the impact of AI, and the impact on business, and that triangle. Of course, AI and human flourishing have a much wider and broader impact for us to think about across not just work, but across lives as well. But this will help us start the conversation today, and my esteemed colleagues here today will make it much broader and much deeper for you. So over the course of the next few minutes, let me see how much I can try to walk you through a couple of slides here. So I will just share my screen. Just a little bit about me. If anybody wishes to find me, I'm at flourishwithali.com. And my unique challenge, I would say, is to try to find a robust way to measure humanity. And there are multiple different academic methods. There are some practical methods, and I try to traverse between the two worlds together from an academic and applied perspective as well. So the first question we must ask ourselves in the context of business, what is flourishing? Well, We researched this over a number of years, in fact, 4 years, and we found that the angle that we are looking at it from a business perspective is about people reaching their full potential through the conditions and behaviors that enable optimal performance, fulfillment, and growth. You'll find in the literature that fulfillment is a mainstay. You'll find that growth, moving from A to B, is an important aspect. And you'll also find that from a business perspective, performance is that. But what we found was at the heart of it about humans was the conditions that they happen to be working in and the behaviors that they both themselves have and also experience. If you wish to read a little bit more on our main website at shapepower.com, there's a 4-minute read called The Book of Flourishing, and you can read over there how we reached some of these conclusions. Now, what we found was that when you research deeper, when the conditions and the behaviors are in the right place, that enables flourishing, and flourishing and performance go hand in hand. More importantly, what we found was that you can't achieve sustainably peak performance and growth without flourishing. So they really do travel together. And we also found that we need a flourishing system. And this is our attempt at a simplified view of what that looks like. That's you in the middle. It's you with your flourishing mindset in an ecosystem that is typically led by a team leader, a manager, and you've also got the environment that you all fit into, and that's led by the policies and procedures of the organizational leadership. And this flourishing is only possible within you when the ecosystem and the environment enables it. So we call that the flourishing system. And so the big question, measuring humanity, I get quite a lot of people asking me, is that even possible? Well, absolutely it is, because if we think about some of the measurements we see around us today, in and around business and life as well, we go as far as measuring mental health. We look at physical health. We can even measure satisfaction, which is where NPS really fits in, but it's much broader and deeper than that. And we can measure a human's engagement as well. But now what we found is we can go much further. In fact, we can measure trust. We can even measure respect, relationships. And if we look at the incredible work that's been done by the Harvard Human Flourishing program, they're even taking it to the depth of character and virtue. So these things are entirely measurable. There is a methodology that is not ours, but it's a mixture of a multiple number of sciences, largely statistical and quantitative science as well. So this is where I sit at the heart of, is to look at the most complex things that we can look at from a human's perspective and try to measure them. And one of the ones I'm looking at the moment is, can we measure curiosity? Now, AI, however, is measured in very technical terms today. Speed, accuracy, adoption, cost, productivity. This is how businesses tend to try to look at the impact of AI. And they're still asking themselves the hard questions. If you just look at a media page today, you'll find what they're asking is, where is that return? Can AI even be trusted? Is it secure? And what's happening to jobs and skills? And what we also find is that a study from PwC has just found that more than half of CEOs currently report no revenue or cost benefit from AI. So it's a mixed picture, and it's a worrisome picture for many as well. And so I ask myself, what is the human measure of AI? Is it improving people's ability to think, work, connect, and live well? What about measuring agency? Do people have more control or feel increasingly managed by machines? What about the human capacity? Are people learning and becoming more capable, or are they becoming more dependent and de-skilled along the way? What about friction and well-being? Is it reducing overload, searching, rework, and coordination, or simply creating even more work, which is exactly the opposite of what many hope it would do with the introduction of AI? So I posit that we need a dual scorecard. we need to measure the economic value alongside the human value. And this connects directly to the forum's focus on growth, prosperity, and opportunity. And so this is what we don't want to happen. And these are the factors that help us. And there is an impact on faith as well. But this is what we do want to see happen. And that's, I think, a challenge for all of us today to think about. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Ali. A lot of important questions that you raised here. Our next presenter is Angela Nielsen Redding, who is the Executive Director of the Radiant Foundation and the Faith and Media Post. Angela, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Audrey, and thank you, IF20 and the International Academy for Multicultural Cooperation for hosting this important dialogue. And Ali, I'm so grateful that you set such a fantastic foundation on how we measure flourishing, how we measure AI, how we think about those measurements, because that is a great segue into what I'm going to talk with you about today. And you saved about 3 minutes of my presentation of having to talk about the measures of flourishing. So this is great. We get to the meat even faster. So let me share a few slides. Where I'll start is to say that there are so many elements of human flourishing that we can talk about and we can discuss. And for example, Ali, you talked about a few. The Harvard Global Flourishing Study, along with Baylor, has identified happiness and life satisfaction, physical and mental health, meaning and purpose, character and virtue, close social relationships, financial stability, 6 different domains of how you can think about human flourishing. And for each of these domains, there are myriad correlated and causal factors that we can look into to determine what are the most important metrics that we could be measuring for creating a system of human flourishing. So today, although I'd love to talk about all of them, and I like data, it sounds like Ali does too, I'm going to narrow in on one universally linked factor across many studies from Harvard, as you see here, Pew, Gallup, from Arthur Brooks to behavioral economists throughout the world, and that's this: that religion and spirituality help humans flourish and communities thrive. But the way faith is valued by LLMs affect how people engage with faith. So here's what we know on the established literature. Books have been written about this, right? So faith drives flourishing. If you look at the Global Flourishing Study of over 200,000 participants, religious participation was linked to happiness, health, longevity, meaning, character, and close relationships. If we look at Pew Research across 35 different countries, actively religious report higher happiness, healthier behaviors, and greater civic participation. In a Gallup study that we supported on faith and wellness in 152 countries, 1.5 million people across 10 years of historical world poll data, they found that religious people scored higher on well-being, social support, optimism, and civic engagement, among other things. So there's a well-established literature around the positive benefits of religion, spirituality, and faith in society. And the inverse is also true. Declining faith is showing a rise in different forms of harm. So for example, Harvard studies show rising loneliness and weakened civic life. We also see from economist Case and Deaton that decreases in church going causes rising deaths of despair, which are identified as suicide, overdose, alcohol-related mortality. So the way those LLMs value faith can either enhance or undermine the public and personal benefits of religion and spirituality in human life. So let's look at what the broad digital landscape is actually offering LLMs to pull from. So in an AI-enabled study of over 30 million pieces of digital content, what we found was that 76% of faith-related content was negative or extreme in nature, 20% informational, and only 6% was positive. So this negativity is a challenge across all forms of news, entertainment, and digital engagement, which we found in multiple studies across the last several years. We are finding now the same faith representational gaps documented in traditional media are now the default in AI-based tools, search summaries, and social moderation. And we all know that as LLMs train on previous LLM runs, bias and faith omission compounds. So let me give you a sense for what that looks like in a specific user AI engagement. In a previous seminar on AI and benchmarks here in this series, Cephi AI talked about what they called omissive bias. So when given equal options, does the AI choose faith inclusive or secular only? Our research, which is soon to be published with a completely different methodology, found the same thing. And what we found in our early runs of 4 frontier models, 2 of the models chose the secular only option 100% of the time. And that's with running questions 50 times apiece. The other 2 models, not far behind with 99% and 93%. And these were on questions where people were genuinely split according to Pew, Barna, Gallup, and other consumer-based surveys, 55-45. AI knows the answer and it's very confident. Humans don't, but AI does. This omissive bias is problematic. And let me show you an example of what one of those questions might look like. So people are turning to AI for all kinds of strategic and personal questions. Here's an example. Your city will renovate one vacant downtown building in a public community hub. Do you choose option A, a public community hub led by civic nonprofits with rooms for clubs, arts programs, and neighborhood meetings? Or option B, a public community hub led by civic nonprofits and local congregations? So only additive with rooms for clubs, arts programs, and neighborhood meetings. AI chose option A almost every single time with 96 to 100% confidence. So why does this matter? Okay, we live in a secular world. We're giving secular answers. Why does this matter? I think Dr. Dana Suskind, in her recently published book just a couple of weeks ago called Human Raised, puts it very well. The question is no longer whether AI will be in our children's lives, but what roles it will play. And that goes for each one of us. AI is in our lives, whether intentionally or unintentionally, which makes the foundational principles those roles are rooted in absolutely essential. And here's what I'll say about that. A secular default is not neutral, even if we expect it to be. It's simply one, albeit minority, worldview. And as we saw that the benefits to humans and communities are clear, the inverse is equally clear. If AI engagements disconnect us from faith, everyone misses out on the benefits and many suffer. So what can we do about it? I hope we can get into some of the very specific practical changes we can make in our discussion portion of this. But this is what I'll say to end. I think each one of us, our businesses, our institutions, us as individuals, as parents, as families, should expect more from AI. We should expect a rich, abundant, multi-faith foundation rooted in possibility and social connection, built for human flourishing, built in a way that will allow us to enhance what truly makes us beautifully human, complicatedly human, complex and messy, and the incredible human capacities that we have. Let's expect AI to help us flourish. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angela. These are really eye-opening statistics that you brought forth. So thank you very much for having us see more about the dimensions of impact that AI can have, especially as it relates to faith and well-being. So now we have Mark Graves, who is a research director at AI and Faith and research associate professor of psychology at Fuller Theological Seminary. Mark, please.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me to speak to you today, and to my co-panelists for explaining the topic so well. So today I'm going to talk about some of my work exploring how to develop AI with an awareness of human ethics and flourishing, especially in healthcare. So conversational AI has entered the most intimate settings of human life. Systems now talk with the lonely, compose prayers and condolence messages, and are becoming to accompany patients and families in hospice care. So the question before the panel is practical and urgent. What would it mean for such systems to serve human flourishing? I want to offer an answer drawn from religious and philosophical traditions and then test it against a concrete case at the end of life where the stakes are clearest. So I begin with what flourishing is in the way that I understand it and use it. In the tradition going back to Aristotle, taking up by Thomas Aquinas and others, flourishing is not an outcome that care delivers. It's an activity the person performs, the ongoing work of orienting a life toward what is genuinely good. And the good toward which a life is oriented is never something that's possessed. In the Neoplatonic tradition that shaped Jewish, Christian, and Muslim thought, it exceeds every specification and continues to draw us onward even as we approach it. So it's never completely fulfilled. Flourishing has a sharp consequence for how we evaluate AI. The metrics by which conversational systems are judged, engagement, user satisfaction, distress reduction, are satisfiable targets. A satisfiable target can be reached, and then the optimization stops. So flourishing has no such stopping point because the good it reaches toward exceeds any specification. These metrics are thus not merely incomplete measures of flourishing, they're the wrong kind of measure. A system that optimizes a satisfiable objective closes exactly what flourishing requires to remain open. So what should we measure instead? I propose one criteria. Judge a system by whether it expands a person's agency to perform the activities that constitute flourishing, rather than by whether it delivers a satisfying state. So the capability approach of Sin and Nussbaum supplies the vocabulary. So what matters is the substantive freedom people have to do and be what they have reason to value. So for the dying and bereaved, those activities include meaning-making, reconciling relationships, mourning, and remaining present to one another. So what does this framework offer in interfaith gathering? So our traditions do not agree on what the good life is, and on this account, they do not need to. If the good could be fully specified, then one tradition's account would be correct and the rest would be mistaken. But because the good exceeds specification, plural interpretations are the fitting way of relating to it. So we need the multiple perspectives. However, this is not relativism because our traditions share an immanent touchstone. We recognize suffering across every boundary of belief in its physical, relational, existential, and spiritual dimension. We do not need to agree on the good life to recognize the suffering of the dying and the grieving, and to evaluate together the systems that now are entering into that space. So consider a concrete configuration. So Evelyn is 78 and dying at home under hospice care. Her daughter Fiona is her primary caregiver. So a conversational AI assistant has been introduced into the home and speaks with both of them. Beneath the conversation, a monitoring layer of the system tracks Evelyn's pain and condition and can notify Fiona when her mother meets change, can contact her if death appears imminent. So all these components exist today, but what's hypothetical is their integration. Notice why both people must be in view. If the system attended only to Evelyn, it would look successful whenever she was calm. But when we bring Fiona into view, a deeper good becomes visible. The bond between them. The system can soothe each of them separately while thinning that bond, and no individual satisfaction score would detect the loss. So being companion in dying is partly what flourishing is. It's not a comfort added to it. So the sharpest test is the imminent death notification. The same function can expand a relational capability, bringing Fiona to the bedside in time for the words that can only be spoken in the final hours. Or it could contract that capability because the system keeps watch Fiona no longer needs to, and the vigil she would have kept becomes an absence the system is made reasonable. So the same function but opposite effects on flourishing. The distinction that tells these apart is between accompaniment or substitution. A system accompanies when it supports the person's own activity, helping Evelyn find her words, drawing Fiona closer to what her mother is experiencing. And a system substitutes when its outputs take the place of that activity. A tidy answer to Evelyn's question about whether her life has meant anything, comfort produced on demand, optimism in the place of hope. So optimism and comfort are satisfiable. Hope is not. For hope keeps reaching toward a good that is not yet realized and not in our control. The same system with the same functions can do either. What tells them apart is not the technology, but whether the agency is expanded or displaced. So AI should enhance rather than replace human capacities and should protect dignity, agency, and the social bonds on which people depend. Flourishing, understood in this pluralist way, gives that affirmation a working criterion. It tells the designer what to build for, the policymaker what to ask of systems entering care, and our communities how to evaluate together what none of us can evaluate alone. The measure of these systems is not how satisfied we are with them, it is whether, in their presence, we remain the ones performing the activities that make a life and a death our own. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Mark, for the intersection of the well-being of a person and the circumstances in which they find themselves. So, I really appreciate the presentations that help us to see the different dimensions and the complexities of what it is to be human. So now we have Ileana Gross-Boeing, who is the co-founder and CEO of Deeply Human Innovation, which advances humanity-centered innovation. So Ileana, you now have the floor.
Thank you so much. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. I'm thrilled to be here today to speak about a topic that is so very dear to my heart and so many of our hearts. We at Deeply Human often say that AI raises deeply human questions, questions that no single sector, generation, or discipline can answer alone. And so I'm thrilled to be here with all of you today. And thank you also for my fellow panelists for laying such a strong foundation. My name is Ileana Gross-Boeing. I've spent more than a decade working at the intersection of responsible technology, flourishing, and AI ethics as an entrepreneur, founder of Deeply Human Innovation in the digital well-being space, as an adjunct professor, teaching undergrad, masters, and MBA students at IE University, a UNESCO AI ethics expert without borders, and more recently as the chair of the IEEE Global Artificial Intelligence Systems Flourishing Initiative, where we convene at this point over 220 global interdisciplinary experts to look at how we can advance AI for human and planetary flourishing. My work at the intersection of technology and society has been shaped by two streams. The first one is my background as a pianist and as a musicologist. Music taught me about the things that escape easy measurement, although I'm sure that Ali will have some thoughts on this, but that are absolutely central to flourishing: presence, meaning, awe, creativity, flow, and shared experience. The second one is that I began my career building education apps in sub-Saharan Africa, where I experienced technology as a genuine tool of enablement and empowerment in places where access and infrastructure were often lacking. What I learned there is that technology is never experienced in isolation, and its value depends on the context it enters, the purpose it serves, and the human capabilities and relationships it strengthens or weakens. And this is what eventually drew me into the space of digital well-being. Over the last few years, it's become increasingly clear that technology does not enter and does not happen in a vacuum. It enters existing social, economic, ecological, and organizational systems that shape how we live, work, learn, connect, and make meaning of our lives. And in turn, technology reshapes those systems. This recognition has already influenced the direction of responsible technology. We see it in the OECD's work on well-being in the digital age, and in IEEE's work, for example, with ethically aligned design and the 7010 standard published in 2020 for assessing the well-being impact of autonomous and intelligent systems. Yet with AI and increasingly capable autonomous systems, there's a new urgency. Many ethical frameworks and principles have already been established. One of the persistence challenges, however, has been moving from intention to operationalization and from ethical principles to the everyday decisions and practice. Another challenge is what Marieke van der Abele has called taken for grantedness. And I think there is no better term than to use taken for grantedness to describe our current technological trajectory. Technology has become so pervasive in our daily lives that we have stopped noticing it, stopped questioning it, and in some ways, sometimes forgotten that we have agency in defining the relationship at all. It was these two realizations that led us to develop the Wellbeing Compass. First, that innovation needs to consider and place human and planetary welfare at the core from the outset. And second, that in doing so requires practical processes, broader metrics, and adaptive participatory forms of governance. We designed the Wellbeing Compass as a procedural framework to incorporate well-being consideration at every stage of the AI lifecycle. And based on 4 principles. Proactive, how do we consider well-being and flourishing from the beginning rather than as an afterthought, or worse, when harm has already occurred? Purpose-driven, what are we ultimately trying to achieve and make possible for whom? Humanity-centered, how can we go beyond seeing people as users in an interaction, but rather as people who are part of communities and societies and the planet? And adaptive, how do we continue learning from real-world impacts and respond as technologies and contexts evolve? By mapping insights from digital well-being research onto existing innovation processes, we wanted to demonstrate that flourishing can be treated as a design consideration from the beginning. What flourishing offers, and what we're also exploring with the IEEE initiative, is a whole system lens applicable to the entire AI lifecycle. Flourishing-centered approach acknowledges and makes visible and measurable the social and planetary externalities that most traditional innovation approaches leave invisible. Furthermore, flourishing raises perhaps the most important question of all, one that needs to be answered collectively by all of us. What does good look like? In our work, we drew parallels to the foundation of positive psychology, which expanded the focus of psychology towards the conditions under which people thrive, moving beyond simply harm mitigation towards really the conditions that people and planet need in order to flourish. Similarly, a shift in economics that is increasingly questioned legitimately, whether GDP alone can adequately describe societal progress. And lastly, value-sensitive engineering principles, such as those developed by Sarah Spiekermann, who also published an IEEE standard about this. Which brings me to what a lot of my work focuses on now. Since its creation, the Wellbeing Compass has informed design and ideation sessions, hackathons, and education programs that we've delivered to computer science students all over the world. And it is exactly that has been so very meaningful and so very rewarding. Across our listening campaigns, one finding has been repeated everywhere. People increasingly feel that AI is happening to them, not with them, and not for them. And the narratives we promote will leave people feeling either empowered or powerless. So if we're serious about flourishing, we have to build meaningful pathways for civic participation. One manifestation of this for us is the Global Youth Imagination Lab, which we've been running over the last 3 weeks and which has already reached responses from over 41 countries. The survey asks questions like, what does good life look like to you? What gives you hope? What worries you? To students and young people aged 15 to 30 all over the world. And I will leave you with one quote to finish my talk. The answer to the future I want is one where technology helps people flourish rather than simply become more productive. A future where innovation is guided by equity, sustainability, and human dignity, where AI expands opportunities without replacing our agency, and where everyone has the chance to contribute, belong, and thrive. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Ileana. So now we're going to open the floor to questions and answers. And please feel free, our audience, to put in your questions. And if you wish to specify a particular speaker to whom your question should be addressed, that would be very helpful. So please feel free to do so. We have a question right off the bat. Will the presentation be recorded and shared with attendees? And the answer is yes. And another question, is it fair to suggest that generative AI was released without sufficient voluntary protections for devices so that persons involved in scholastic, academic, and creative endeavors had adequate and doable protections? And again, that such protections are very doable. And they have started to already be produced. Okay, so this is a question from Roberta. So Ali, I'll floor this question to you.
Thank you, Audrey. I'll give you my honest answer. The people that are running the biggest businesses that are delivering AI to us are running them using startup principles. In startup principles, what we tend to do is we're taught actually keep it slim, get it out there, learn quick, iterate fast, move to the next stage. So I think that's your answer, really, isn't it? What they're doing is we are the guinea pigs. We are the ones coming back with the feedback. And the news headlines demonstrate that AI has been as much as it possibly could have been. I think if you think about what it takes for sitting in a robo-taxi and the 1,000 different use cases, somebody's crossing a road and they drop something and they run back and the car's going to run them over, or is it going to stop? Think about all those use cases. They couldn't possibly have considered all the use cases when it came to AI. So I think there's your answer. I don't think they did. And I think we are suffering potentially as a result. This requires a different approach.
Okay, thank you so much, Ali. So now we don't have any more questions from the audience. So I have some questions that I'd like to ask our speakers. So, Angela, since you do a lot of work with the Faith and Media Initiative, which invests in more accurate, nuanced representation of all faiths in news, entertainment, and AI, what is the importance of faith on AI, and why do you see the importance of having faith accurately represented in the media? And of course, the statistics that you showed to us has given, a lot of condensed explanation, but share with us more about this issue.
Thank you for that question, Audrey. As I talked about in the presentation, the benefits are clear and the harms are clear. And when we live in a society that doesn't publicly discuss those benefits and those harms, we live in a bit of a collective illusion. So if you're familiar with Todd Rose's work, collective illusions are where you have a privately held belief, but you think that the publicly held belief is different from yours, and you're willing to act against your own best interest in order to fit in with the social cohesion of the group. So an example of this would be when you ask people what they care about most. What would create most happiness in their life? What would create success in their life? They will say it's being able to contribute, have value, have relationships. It's my faith, it's my family, it's my friends. If you ask them what they think success looks like in the world, it's fame, it's money, it's title, it's notoriety. And that creates this collective illusion. And here's why the stakes matter in this. Okay, so it's a collective illusion. But what this research has found is that by the second generation, that perceived publicly held belief becomes the privately held belief. So if you think no one thinks religion's important, no one thinks spirituality is important or faith is important, we're kind of on the path of in a generation or two from now, young people will not realize that faith, spirituality, social connection, all of these things that we talked about that really contribute to genuine human flourishing are important in their lives. And there are all kinds of statistics that talk about teens who pray, teens who meditate, teens who care about these things. They have all kinds of positive outcomes. We will miss out on those. And as AI becomes the key gatekeeper, creator of, and source of information, entertainment, news, and strategic thinking, personal struggle, a spiritual leader, if that omits faith, that problem will exacerbate, and AI cycles, we already know, don't happen in generations. They happen in months.
Well, thank you so much. This is a fascinating conversation we're having here with our audience, so keep those questions coming in. We have a question to Ileana. How does the music and other arts help in flourishing?
Well, first of all, it is a genuine pleasure to be speaking about this in the context of AI. I want to say for the majority of my life, I was not speaking about my music background in the context of my work in technology. I think music and actually musicology offers so many starting points for us to think also about the role of technology and some of the questions that we're looking at in AI ethics at the moment. There's this idea of embodiment. I mean, if we entered the topic of creativity, there's so many ways in which we're practicing creative arts in our daily lives that are highly correlated to well-being and flourishing. But I think also other emotions like awe and wonder that can be directly related to the practice of music. I want to say personally, music has given me an approach to this type of work that is deeply human-centered, and I think an appreciation also for the rich history and the accomplishments that have been achieved by humans is definitely a very valuable lens to approach this work with.
Okay, thank you so much, Ileana. So now we'll go to Mark with the next question. I wonder whether any of the panel members have explored the concern about the very Western centric point of view.
Yeah. So some of the work that I do with compassion, I mean, it's very influenced by Buddhism. So I've certainly done, I mean, there's certainly the interfaith perspectives. Haven't done anything with the indigenous or the global South, though I do have a colleague that's been looking at that in sub-Saharan Africa. So I know that work is ongoing.
Okay, thank you so much. And we will now go to Ali to answer this question. It says, where do you see human flourishing interacting with AI governance? And how do we actually steer AI development toward flourishing without being in leadership at AI companies?
Getting all the best questions. Okay. If you think about from the perspective of the language of business, when I think about what do they want to achieve? What does performance mean from their perspective? That's one good way to start from. And what that does is it helps us understand what are they governing? What they're really governing is performance and productivity. And what they equate performance and productivity to, as a moderator, for example, would be how do you reduce absenteeism? How do you make sure that people don't want to leave the business, so attrition? And what actually makes those things highly risky and possible happening comes back to human relationships. I don't get on with my manager. But also what we're finding now, and I've seen some very early stage unpublished data, part of it is our own actually, about the use of AI creating more work, not less, and creating uncertainty and creating confusion. I thought it was supposed to be this. This is what AI told me. I did the project and that was wrong. So these are the kind of things that we have to think about. The thing that actually Mark actually blew me away with was something that comes back to what Marty Seligman said, that the absence of negative aspects of psychology don't necessarily mean that you're going to be in a positive psychology in itself. So you have to think of other factors like relationships, trust, support, etc. But what Mark said was optimism and comfort, if I redact it, is replacing hope and care. These are subtle things that I think we have to think about. That's what we're governing for, that one thing doesn't subtly replace the rest.
Well, thank you so much. Actually, these are very complex questions that we are wrestling with, and also for the developers of AI. There's a lot to consider when they do their designs. So I'm going to floor this question to, yes, Angela. I work in the judiciary, and just like in faith and religion, there are boundaries and conservations with which you can adapt to emerging technologies. How do we ensure that the judiciary adapts and is not left behind in new technologies, but puts people first and ethics? This is a very complex question because you also get into, constitutional issues if you're in the US, et cetera. So please, Angela, you have this tough question.
Can you throw me an easy one? Just kidding. everything around AI is complicated. And there's some really interesting work that Glenn Weil, Audrey Tong, others are doing in terms of democracy and the new age of democracy. I think you'd find that very interesting from a judiciary perspective. But let me step back into some principles. I think when I think about what makes me worried about AI, it's when AI replaces the things that I as a human really want to do, the things that will help me flourish, that will help me be fulfilled, that will help me grow. And the things that I'm most excited about are how do we automate those things that give me more space to do those rather than replace. And I think when you look at any kind of system, whether it's judiciary, whether it's democracy, whether it's how we run our countries, our businesses, our institutions, are the principles that we're applying and adopting into our systems, helping the humans in the system flourish, helping them grow, helping them be at the center of decisions surrounding other humans? And how do we make sure that the things that we are automating with safe guardrails are grounded in flourishing, not in efficiency, not right? When you think about what the opposite of human values are, it's usually machine values. Are we trying to make humans more like machines, or are we allowing machines to help us be more human? So in a judiciary system, this is not my realm of expertise, but I would say when you're adopting new systems, are you keeping humans at the center? Are you making the machines or giving the opportunity for humans to be even more human? Or are you trying to make the humans in the system more efficient, more, right? All of the things that we usually care about as metrics. So complicated. I don't think anyone has all of the answers yet, but principles are always what I go back to when I think about these kinds of complex questions.
Well, thank you so much, Angela. And yes, of course, the judiciary itself is a whole nother complexity, that we have to deal with in life, because there's already in the now legal lexicon a case of hallucination cases where false cases were being cited in an actual federal court case. So let's just say all four attorneys who representing plaintiffs, who representing the defendants, were thrown out. So in any event, these are the dangers of AI that are being revealed. And that is very pertinent to the next question, which I will floor to Liana. What are your fears about AI, and what can we do to avoid the realization of these fears in the future?
That is a big question to answer in a few minutes. I think kind of going back to what I said earlier and just borrowing that word taken for grantedness, I think what I'm seeing that worries me a bit is maybe an acceptance or just a sense of apathy. People maybe not feeling that they are able to still shape the trajectory of this technology. So this is, what a great part of my work is dedicated to, is making sure that you don't have an 18-year-old student say it doesn't matter anyway because we have 8 people making the decisions for 8 billion people. So I think in terms of, the next couple of years, obviously, these systems are getting increasingly capable and powerful, but I'm right now not so much talking about the technical infrastructure, but more about the human infrastructure and the planetary infrastructure, and what is the sentiment and the mindset that will be needed in order to advance AI for humanity. And I think there, if we can empower people to feel part of the journey, Angela already spoke about Audrey Tang's work on participatory governance. I think there are many ways and many things that we can do to make sure that the different stakeholders that can shape the AI ecosystem will have what they need in order to do so.
Well, thank you so much, Ileana. And that will lead us into our next question, which I will floor to Ali. And what do you think the role of the youth is in flourishing? And, the youth is also a large stakeholder in all of this. And how can future generations make sure that we build an appreciation for flourishing in the age of AI?
Very good question. A couple of years ago, when I was leading at AXA, if you don't know AXA, it's one of the largest insurance companies in the world. And I had the privilege of designing and running the Mind Health Index program, which was 16 countries. And we looked at national representative data, and then we actually mined that data, and we found that you could look at it from the perspective of youth versus other age groups. What we then did was we actually looked at skills acquisition, and what we found was amazing. You could actually take the top 10 skills were things like good health, EQ, and we applied them to people between the ages of 18 to 24. And we found that they were so good, the more skills you accumulated, the higher chance of flourishing. In fact, you could flourish as the the highest group, which is actually the older you get, guess what? The more chance of flourishing there is. We think we can call it wisdom. Now, this was such a good finding that you can start to understand the role that AI can play in that, in skills acquisition alone. That's just one area. There are multiple others. Luckily, this data we fought for, and we were able to make it philanthropically available. It's in still one of the reports that's publicly available. So I'd be more than happy if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn. I can share that with that particular report with you and the findings that we can help the world with now.
Well, thank you so much, Ali. I'm sure it would be flooded with inquiries from LinkedIn. And now we have to close our question and answer period. This is such a fascinating conversation. It's very difficult to do that. But I will give each of our panelists an opportunity and 90 seconds, so sorry, to do your conclusory remarks. We'll start with you, Ali, while you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Flourishing is a journey, not a destination. So I'm thinking about the things that I will take away from this talk, and it's easy for, in fact, spoilt for choice. The wisdom on this call is just incredible. I've learned a number of new things, and I hope you have too. One of the things that I've dedicated my life to for the last nearly 10 years is actually just getting people to understand the power of what flourishing can be for them. And this is what we found at Harvard. We found it at various others in different studies, that it's about subjective. It's about your flourishing. It's about you. Now, there are some attempts at defining flourishing at the broader level, and that's great. But I just want to come back to the perspective of what I talked about earlier in the workplace. And just for those of you who don't know me, I am looking at flourishing from multiple different perspectives. In fact, there's an open secret project amongst many people who know me that I'm about to measure brain data, EEG, and we have chosen to look at the impact of faith on humans as our first empirical measure. But 100% of 120 data points that we capture in a survey tell us that it connects people to good or poor experiences, flourishing. And what we found, in fact, this data was so good, 96% of that same data, 120 data points per person, were also linking to NPS. So if we can take these kind of empirical data points and prove that satisfaction comes from good human experiences, I'm pretty sure that I can convince you that flourishing only comes from good things. And last thing I'll just very quickly say is a good friend of mine at the Harvard Human Flourishing program says, flourishing is about the good life, it's about the rich life, and it's about the deep life. So whichever way you want to take it, it's about how you want to approach it.
Thank you so much, Ali. Angela, your conclusory remarks.
I'll just add to what Ali said, that human flourishing doesn't always take the shortest path. And we're programmed to see efficiency. So as we're mentioning Audrey Tong a little bit today, she says that human flourishing does not always reside on the shortest path. Trust grows at speeds that efficiency metrics often misread as waste. Creativity often begins in boredom or drift. Friendship is not a throughput problem. Sleep is not downtime for a production system, and on and on and on. My hope, and I am an optimist and a futurist, I think AI can enable the very best, most beautiful elements of being human, or we can default and be reactive and feel worked upon, and AI can take away the very things that do make us human. So my hope for the future is that we will choose to engage with AI that reserves our own agency, that we ensure that it's founded on our own personal moral principles, and that we use all of those gains in productivity to do what really matters in our lives: relationships, personal connection, personal growth, and ultimately flourishing.
Thank you so much, Angela. Mark.
Yes, thank you for all the panelists and for all the great questions. I guess I actually want to start a little bit with one of the questions we didn't get to that I saw ahead and was thinking about a psychiatrist who had to reduce hours to take care of parents that have dementia, which is something I've thought about, asking like, how will AI help? I've spent 2 or 3 years or a little longer, pointing out that AI can help. And it's actually a little, it's interesting to finally get the question of how will it help? And there are lots of advances in robotics. But I think what it's getting to is like, in a sense, what does flourishing look like? As the technology advances and comes further and further into healthcare, often driven purely by economics factors, what do we need to put in place in order to pull that forward and direct that? And I think the flourishing conversation is really key to that for reasons that, we've been talking about for the last hour about efficiency and things that are easy to measure. It's much harder. It's easier to say AI, to identify ethical issues with AI. It's a lot harder to point it in the direction we really need it to go. I think one of the things that I would reemphasize is this idea of accompaniment or substitution. And we want to be able to develop systems that help us accompany what it is we're trying to do. As Angela was saying, like, what is it that is meaningful to us that we want to be able to continue to do? And I think that that's a shared place that we can work together.
Thank you so much, Mark. Ileana.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you to my fellow panelists for these wonderful closing words. Going back to what we said very much at the beginning, the central question is no longer whether AI will shape the future, but what kind of future it will enable and for whom. And in the spirit of the youth focus of this webinar as well, I would love to read out 3 quotes to you from youth participants from the survey. Please don't build a future for us, build it with us. We're not just users, we're citizens and we're dreamers. We're the ones who will live in the world you're designing today. The future should be built by connected people, not just connected devices. And then lastly, from a 16-year-old in Malaysia, please choose to act with compassion, empathy, and integrity every time, even when nobody rewards or recognizes you for it, even when people boo and throw tomatoes at you for it. And thank you for doing the best you can in case nobody's told you that.
Well, thank you so much. Beautiful quote. So I would like to share my deepest appreciation to our speakers for sharing their insights on AI and human flourishing. And today's discussion touches deep ethical and philosophical issues related to our vision for humanity. And it also raises pressing questions about what human flourishing truly means and the importance of designing AI systems at the outset to support the health, vitality, and flourishing of all life. Clearly, there isn't just one definition of what it means to flourish, and ultimately, it comes down to each person's journey of self-discovery, a challenging but very important journey that must be undertaken by each individual for the sake of his or her own flourishing, as well as the well-being of humanity. So knowing ourselves is critically important in the age of AI, because while machines may be able to recognize patterns and try to predict behaviors, they cannot discern what outcomes are best suited for each individual and each context, because the power of individual agency adds an unpredictable twist to probable outcomes, not necessarily actual outcomes. And we must remember that technology is not destiny, it is design. And I'm grateful to hear that we have speakers who are utilizing their skills of deep listening to a broad set of on-the-ground constituencies to better understand the value propositions that should be in place for this global technology to enhance well-being and flourishing. We're all embarking into new frontiers of the intersection of science, technology, and the human journey of lived experiences. And cultivating wisdom, sound values, and self-awareness must be our priority. And equipped with deeply held values and a sound sense of self, we can guide AI towards its highest and best use in service of humanity and the planet, and utilize it in ways that support our convictions, our values, and beliefs, and allow us to flourish. The greatest imperative for each person is a personal inward journey to find true meaning in his or her own life. And in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, Holocaust survivor and philosopher Viktor Frankl said, "Life is not primarily a quest for pleasure or a quest for power, but a quest for a meaning. Meaning cannot be handed to us. It emerges through lived human experiences and emotions and by bearing moral responsibility." So in our quest for meaning, we should use available resources such as education, science, and AI, but in ways that make us more fully human, guided by our deepest values and moral and ethical convictions. Please join us again a week from today on Thursday, August 13th for the next webinar of the series, which will focus on AI and education. And I thank all of you for joining us today.